Hi and welcome back to the channel. I've got three hidden gems of 1940s and 1950s cinema here for you this time. We're back on track. No new movies, no Marvel, no James Bond. We are back on track with some movies that are kind of film noir, or at least film noir adjacent in one case. Two of the movies I hadn't seen before. The third one I had, but for me they're all really interesting pieces of cinema from America in the 1940s and the 1950s, and I knew that was going to go to the screensaver as soon as I started filming. We might as well start with this one because it's up on the screen. Three Strangers from 1946, directed by John Negulesco, who directed one of my favourite 1940s movies, a movie called Roadhouse from 1948, which I'm going to do a future video about. But this one we've got Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre, who were both of course in The Maltese Falcon, and Geraldine Fitzgerald, who was an Irish actress. The movie was written by John Huston, who directed The Maltese Falcon, and Howard Koch. It's London 1938, and a beautiful young woman lures two men up to her apartment. And one of them, of course, is Sidney Greenstreet, the other one is Peter Lorre, and the woman is Geraldine Fitzgerald's character, Crystal. And she tells them a story about a statue of the Chinese goddess Kuan Yin that she has in a little shrine she built in her house. It's the night of Chinese New Year, and the legend goes that if you make a wish at midnight on Chinese New Year to Kuan Yin, and if you are three strangers all with the same wish, that wish will come true. So Crystal needed two strangers, a buttery played by Sidney Greenstreet, who was a solicitor, a lawyer, and Johnny West, played by Peter Lorre, who's a kind of drunken piano player guy who has become involved in a robbery where a night watchman was killed. So the three of them have about 20 minutes to figure out what they want to have as the one wish between them. As it happens, Crystal has a sweepstakes ticket, which is going to get many thousands of pounds for them if it comes up. And so they each sign the back of the ticket to say that they will share in any winnings of the ticket, and they sign their real names and put the ticket inside a drawer in the bottom of the statue. Then they make the same wish, which is that the ticket wins. A little bit of a strange setup for a movie, but an interesting one, and it kind of works. We then follow each of the three characters leading up to the time when the sweepstakes horse race is run and the ticket becomes incredibly valuable if it wins. And we see why they need the money, who they are. We meet a whole bunch of other characters in there. We meet Crystal's alienated husband, who's been living in Canada, played by Alan Napier, who was Alfred the Butler in the 1960s Batman TV series. He had a long and distinguished career as an actor before that, and he's really good as Crystal's husband, who she has an obsession with. They've been living separately for years, and he wants to get married again, but she won't give him a divorce. She wants to hold on to him because she wants to hold on to him. So essentially she's a narcissist. Abatri is handling some trusts for a wealthy woman and hasn't followed the rules of the trust, speculated on some stocks in South Africa which have become worthless for him. So he's got to find £2,000, which was a lot of money in those days, and he needs the ticket to win so that he can avoid total shame and going to jail for mishandling the trusts. And then Johnny is set up by the guy who actually did the killing in the robbery, who is played oddly enough by Robert Shane, who also has a DC connection because he was the guy who played Inspector Henderson in the George Reeves Superman TV series in the 1950s. His English accent's a little bit sketchy, but it's an okay version of it, I suppose. And so Johnny is set up and goes to jail and potentially execution for a robbery he didn't commit. Now, Johnny's kind of philosophical about it. He's drunk, he's whimsical, he knows that he didn't actually do it, but he's kind of resigned to his fate. And Peter Lorre is the most valuable player in this movie. He's got such a smooth style about him, playing both the drunken version of Johnny and Johnny when he's sober. He's philosophical, he's romantic to his girlfriend Icy, and he is incredibly likable. Whereas Sydney Greenstreet's solicitor is self-serving and pompous and sweaty when he gets nervous and not his best self. In fact, at one stage he proposes marriage to the woman whose trust he is handling so that he can avoid the problems he has with mishandling the trust. And which one will get through? It's kind of like 3 coins in the fountain before 3 coins in the fountain. Now, the movie sets up that Kuan Yin is the goddess of fortune in Chinese mythology, which isn't true. And it may be a deliberate bait and switch there, because what Kuan Yin is the goddess of mercy and compassion. And knowing that makes it a much more interesting film in some ways. We see all 3 characters just waiting to see if this ticket works and to see whether the goddess is going to honour it. And we see the travails the 3 characters have as we're waiting for this horse race to happen. Now, being the audience, we kind of know that the ticket's going to be valuable at one stage. The ending of the film is really interesting, and I like it, and it's kind of whimsical in a way. It's horrible for one of the characters, it's horrible for another one of the characters, but it really does tell a good tale, and it's not quite like any film of its time. It's got that slightly mystical, supernatural aspect potentially, though it's never confirmed that the idol actually works. And that's really interesting as well, because I liked all 3 of them at the start of the film, and by the end of the film I didn't like 2 of them. So if you're in the mood for a really nice little Warner Brothers B picture from the 1940s, which made money, it doubled its money, so it was a successful film on its own terms. It's a movie that really hasn't got enough love, and I find it more interesting than a lot of pictures that are a lot more prominent from that era. And the ensemble works, the 3 main characters work, the supporting cast is pretty good, and there's a buddy of Johnny West's, the Peter Lorre character, who really has an interesting character arc, and his loyalty to Johnny has an interesting undertone to it as well. So I recommend you check out 3 Strangers if you get a chance. I'll post a link, if I can find one, to somewhere where you can get the physical media. But for me, this one was a hidden gem. Hadn't seen it before, and I really liked it. So let's move on to the second film now. So I've got a physical copy of The Bribe. Here it is. It's an old Warner Archive version of it, and the cast is fantastic. It's got Robert Taylor, who was a kind of stiff leading man in 1940s and 1950s cinema, but the rest of the main cast is terrific. You've got Ava Gardner playing Elizabeth, who is a nightclub singer on the island of Carlotta off the coast of Central America. Who is married to a drunken ex-pilot played by John Hodiak, who is kind of interesting as well. There's a creepy old guy wandering around the island, played by Charles Lawton.
Hard liquor goes to my feet. Makes my feet swell up like tamales.
And the big villain of the piece, Carwood, is played by Vincent Price. So you've got a crazy hot cast here at an interesting time in each of their careers, and you've got a really fine, kind of unsung film noir. Now, some people may have seen parts of this movie already, because a lot of it was gutted and used for Carl Reiner's 1982 comedy, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, the one with Steve Martin and Rachel Ward in it. And funny though that movie is, going back to the original is even more fun. It's a studio-based film noir, and Robert Taylor, whose real name, by the way, was Spangler Arlington Bro, I don't know why he changed it, is kind of stiff as the lead character Rigby, who is a government agent who is sent down to the island of Carlotta because there's a scam going on after the war, where ex-military aeroplane engines are being shipped as scrap metal down to Carlotta and assembled and sold on without giving the government their tax money and their revenue for it. So his boss, played by John Hoyt, who we know from many, many things, sends him down to Carlotta undercover to pretend to go down there for a holiday fishing. and to find out where the plane parts are going and who's running the scam, basically. So he goes down to the island, which is incredibly hot. It's building up to a monsoon season. The island's hot and sweaty. It's your kind of generic Central American island from any number of 1940s Hollywood movies. And he goes to a nightclub called Pedro's, where Ava Gardner is this songbird singing in the cabaret. Now, Ava Gardner at that time was one of the most stunning women in Hollywood, and her Elizabeth is kind of sensual and sexy and vulnerable at the same time. And as she says in the movie, she hasn't always been a good wife to him. Robert Taylor, of course, is a good-looking guy. Ava Gardner is beautiful. It's inevitable that the characters do form a romantic attachment. Now, if there's a weakest link in this, apart from the stiffness of Robert Taylor, it's probably John Hodiak, who's great when he's playing his character sober, but he overplays it when his character's drunk, and that kind of takes you out of the film just a little bit.
Oh, the drinks. Come in. Sit down. Thank you. Good. Put it on the table. See?
But then you get J.J. Beeler, the English expatriate, who is in on the scheme with the engine parts and who steals the movie from everybody else. His character is menacing and humorous at the same time. He's charming and cherubic.
Just a minute, Mr. Rigby. We know who you are, Mr. Rigby. My connections know.
That's great. Who am I? I've often wondered.
You could be a guy who collects $10,000 just to leave this stinking town.
But he's a bit of a bastard as well. He wants the money because he needs to get his feet taken care of. He has problems with his feet, which an operation will solve. And he wants to do that so he can live without pain, basically. And of course, the husband, played by John Hodiak, his name's Tugwell, wants the money so that he and Elizabeth can get off the island. And Carwood, the lead bad guy, played by Vincent Price, is just plain evil. Now, it's kind of interesting because this is 1948, 1949, and Robert Taylor's character and Vincent Price's character have exactly the same pencil-thin mustache, which is a little confusing at times. But the movie's plot is as much about the temptation for Rigby to take a bribe that's offered to him, which is a significant amount of money at the time. And he's tempted to take it for a number of reasons, one of which is, of course, he's fallen in love with Elizabeth. And another is that she's been set up by her husband and by Carwood. And that if the bad guys are arrested, she'll get 10 years in jail, even though she doesn't know anything about the scheme and was just there supporting her husband, who was the pilot who was supposed to fly the planes that the engines were in out of the island. But his health declines and she ends up nursing him in bed because he has a heart condition and it's getting progressively worse. So there's a moral complexity to this movie that's kind of not easy to dismiss. And the temptation for Rigby to take the bribe and say, oh, I couldn't find out what happened to the parts, is pretty significant. So they set up this morally complex network of people all daisy-chained together in an interesting way. And then you have an action climax, which wasn't filmed by the director, but by Vincente Minnelli, who later went on to do any number of things for MGM. And it's a great action scene at the end because it takes place in the annual carnival for the town. And Robert Taylor and Vincent Price have a chase through a whole bunch of exploding fireworks. The fireworks are all set up on stands and things. And Rigby chases Carwood through the fireworks until there's ultimately the usual climax at the end. But it's filmed really excitingly, and there's some really nice stunt work among these exploding and pinwheeling fireworks. It kind of rivals, in its own way, the ending to Lady from Shanghai with the Hall of Mirrors, in that it gives us a natural environment that happens where the location is. The shattering glass in Lady from Shanghai emphasises the menace, and the exploding fireworks and flash pots of the fireworks display really does enhance the menace of the climax. And it's an interesting film for that reason. It's got a moral complexity about it, It's got a great location. Even though it was shot on a studio, it said the location of Carlotta really is part of the narrative in a big way. And you've got Charles Lawton stealing the film slowly. You've got beautiful Ava Gardner. You've got a stalwart hero. And you've got Vincent Price for your main villain. What more do you need to know to see The Bribe? It's just a great film noir. Very much second tier, and it hasn't got a lot of love from a lot of people. But if you want a hidden gem film noir that you might not have seen before, try this one. I saved the best one for last, and it is a mind-blowingly good film. From 1951, it's called The Well. It may have been recommended to me by somebody on the comments on the channel, so if so, put your hand up, and congratulations to you, because this one is a hidden gem that everybody should see. The setup's pretty simple. A young girl called Caroline is walking on her way home from school and disappears. Her parents go and see the police, and the police start a search for her and find a man who was seen with Caroline giving her flowers outside a florist store in town. He then walked her part of the way to school and then went off on his own. He's a stranger to town, even though his cousin or uncle, one of the two, runs the local construction company. And the fact that this guy has been arrested and may be released because there's no evidence that he kidnapped or did anything to Caroline causes tensions in the town, because the young girl is black and the man is white. And the town, which is kind of racially integrated, suddenly splits down the middle as the search continues for Caroline and the gossip and the rumours start. A couple of the family members of the young girl confront the uncle and then ask him what's going on with his nephew. He falls over and hits his head, and the rumour starts that, they beat him up. Didn't actually happen that way, and we see that it didn't happen that way. And so things escalate. The gossip mills start, the rumours start. There's confrontations, there are shop windows broken. A young black woman is almost run over by a jeep full of white guys. There are fights in the street. There's basically going to be a race riot in the town. And the civic leaders, both black and white, meet in the town hall and try to work out what they need to do. Do they need to call in the state militia? Do they need to try to handle it themselves? The police chief is really on the ball with this and is, in a sense, the hero of the piece in a lot of ways. When a racist cop starts escalating things, he takes him off active duty and puts him on desk duty to keep him away from the local black community, and everything's at boiling point. One of the black civic leaders tells them what a race riot was like because he saw his father dragged behind a car and family members killed in a previous race riot. And you've got to remember, this is 1951, so that could well have been the Tulsa riots in 1921. So all the history of race riots is evoked. The town's on boiling point. And then, as we see at the start of the film, and we know this before all of this occurs, Caroline's fallen down a pipehead well in a meadow, and a young boy finds her school books near the well, and suddenly it becomes a race against time to rescue this young girl. She's about 60 feet down. The pipe was fairly tight, so I suppose that slowed her fall. She's alive, but they need to get to her, and they don't know how to do it. And that's when the movie pivots in an interesting way. The whole town suddenly bands together and works together to get this young girl out of the well. It's an incredible film. Now, the pivot doesn't necessarily work based on what we know of racial hatred in contemporary times. If it's a little bit idealistic there, that's okay. I don't mind that, because it shows the way that gossip and misinformation spreads hatred. The first part of the movie, where that gossip and hatred and the misinformation gets spread, kind of foreshadows a lot of things that are happening on social media in the 21st century. It shows how the internalized racism of a lot of people can be an incredibly dangerous thing. And there are a whole bunch of different little vignettes of people. There are some black university students who are discussing it from a sociological point of view, and who really know that the things aren't going to go their way if there is a race riot. There are the town leaders, there's the family. The father's a little bit less than a good person, but the mother is a wonderful mother. The family bands together, the town bands together, and suddenly they've got this rescue to do. And all of the racial bullshit is dropped while the whole town bonds together to rescue a little girl. Now, it's idealistic, it's utopian. That pivot is crazy. But this is 1951 in Hollywood. A 1951 Hollywood movie addressing racial tensions in such a very blunt way is fantastic. Now, there are some familiar faces in the cast. The person you're going to know is the guy who gave the little girl flowers, who was Harry Morgan, who later turned up in MASH as Colonel Potter and had done a number of other things, including Dragnet with Jack Webb. But he's really good as the guy who's accused of something he didn't do, and is really worried that his whole life is going to be marked by the fact that somebody in this town thought he was a pedophile or a child murderer. And his character arc is really interesting as much as it is the whole town's character arc. And I like this film a lot. I think it's probably one of the best hidden gems I've seen in a very long time. It addresses issues that are still around. It gives us dramatic tension. We don't know whether the young girl's going to be found dead or alive. It could end up being tragic. It could end up being triumphant. We just don't know anywhere along the film. And the film doesn't give us anything to telegraph the outcome. It just shows us people putting aside their idiocies for a common good. And yeah, I don't mind that it's utopian. Yeah, the pivot doesn't feel realistic. I don't care one tiny bit. I like this film a lot because of what it says and what it shows. And having a wonderfully integrated cast in a 1951 American film, this was independently made. And it probably didn't show a lot in white cinemas in the South. But I think it's one that really needs to be reevaluated and reappreciated, given the events of the last, say, 10 years, particularly in the United States, but also here in Australia. It's a real hidden gem. It's a wonderful piece of cinema. You should check it out. So that's it for this time around. Of course, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment if you've seen any of these films, or you want to see any of these films, or you have other hidden gems you want to recommend. I'm always up for that. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. And as always, look after yourselves, stay safe, enjoy your movies, watch some hidden gems, take a chance on a movie you've never heard of before. Watch some good ones, watch some bad ones. You're going to find something interesting sooner or later. And I'll catch you next time.